Great. Seems to work. Okay, hello everyone. Yes, you already mentioned the name of the talk. We are going to discuss how you can validate your business case faster with the help of low code. Before we jump into the topic, a few words about myself. I started actually 5 years ago at Zühlke. I was probably in the same position as you are at the moment. I finished my studies at the University of Basel. I wrote one application. I wrote an application to Zühlke. I joined Zühlke as a .NET software engineer, worked 2 years as a software engineer, decided then to switch my career path to project management. And after 2 more years, I decided to start as the head of low code at Zühlke. I got in touch with low code, with technologies as a project manager in several projects. And since the beginning of the year, we officially also founded a team that does low code in various dimensions. And I'm leading the team. I'm also responsible for the strategic development and also the market activities. So more or less everything about low code comes through my table. If you're interested in more low code stuff, or if you want to get in touch with me, there is the LinkedIn profile. But other than that, maybe let's directly start with today's talk and topic. When I studied computer science, I got multiple times asked whether I want to support someone in building an application, because someone said, hey, I have a great idea, and I want to have a mobile app. Can you do this for me over the weekend for free? And I then always replied, listen, building software is hard. It takes time. You also need time to learn it, so you can't do it on your own. So it's probably not going to work that I build for you the application and you get all the money if it is successful, and I'm just doing it for free. So, and basically there are people that do know how to build software, and there are maybe other people that do have an idea about what a great software could do. And today's talk should focus a bit on how you can bridge this gap and also make it more accessible for more people to build software. The key issue is, if you do have a great idea to build something, it is expensive to build the first version of your application, especially if you need to hire software engineers or engage a company to build an application for you. So if you want to get venture capital, if you want to onboard new people, if you want to have a larger team that works with you on this application that you have in mind, this business idea, you somehow need to have a first prototype to show people, because if you just talk about your software, but it's not tangible in any way, it's probably becoming hard to find someone who actually would like to invest money in your business idea. So there are basically 3 things you probably need to make your business idea work. You need to have a first prototype, and that should be quick, because usually in this business, time is money. So if you need to engage someone to build the software, then it takes longer, it's just becoming more expensive. It would be great if you can bridge what I showed before, so that you could do it on your own, even if you don't have that many IT skills, or if you do have the IT skills, you can do it faster because it's easier. And last but not least, you also probably need to adjust your software several times, because the first time when you are going to launch your product, it's probably not what the market actually wanted, and you will learn something on the way and need to change your system somehow to adapt it to the new market needs. And then there's a big question, is there something that fulfills all 3 criteria? So speed, more easily accessible, and also that you can change it on the way, even if you have limited IT skills. And yes, obviously, the answer is already in the title. There is a technology called low code. And basically, low code itself focuses on writing less or no code to build applications. There are in the market currently a lot of different platforms that claim to be low code. We at Zühlke, we mainly use the one on top, Mendix and Simplifier, but also the Microsoft Power Platform, which maybe some of you already know. This is quite famous in the market. And there are a lot of others. I think even UiPath is here as well. Why are there so many different platforms and also different categories of platforms that claim to be low-code? It's probably because currently Gartner, one of the large research companies, claims that up to 70% of all newly built software in 2024 will be with the help of low-code. So everyone currently tries to somehow say that their platforms also do low-code, just to also take this famous vibe somehow. We can maybe say there are a couple of systems that are already here and they adopted some low-code. This might be CRMs or also the BPA platforms. Then there are the ones that we work with that are actually really built to do low-code, so to build applications from scratch. And one of the very interesting movements is also this topic of the Power Platform, so the citizen development and automation platforms, which aim to be as easy as possible so that you really don't need to have any IT skills or programming skills to build applications. In the end, it all comes down to that a low-code platform has 5 different categories or 5 different components that each of these platforms fulfills. It is about having pre-built components. It's about a visual way of building applications. It's about having a CI/CD pipeline ready from the beginning, so integrated build pipelines and also environments that you can use out of the box. And an easy way to connect your systems with connectors to other systems. These are the technical parts of the application. We dive into that in a moment. But if you as a company decide to use low-code to build larger applications, this is not only going to have, or it's not only done by buying the platform itself, it also needs an adoption of your culture and also of your organizational structure to really get the full boost of having more people building software. One of the aspects is that if more people start building software, you need to think about how do you keep control on what is actually built and what data is transformed in which way, for example. And if you manage as a company to overcome these hurdles, you can really use low-code in a lot of different areas. And the one that we are currently talking about will be the first one here, the innovation and prototyping cluster. If we go a bit more into the theory before we then also jump into how you actually do that, the visual development is shown here. So this is basically how you represent logic. So instead of a textual representation of code, you can also use a visual way. As you can see on the top right corner, for example, this is a BPM-like notation, and it's from Mendix, and this shows actually a piece of logic in Mendix. You can also see on the bottom left corner the OutSystems platform, which you can just take elements from the left-hand side and drop it on the canvas to build your user interface. The pre-built components, as already mentioned, can be, for example, user interface elements, such as buttons, text boxes, and things like that. But it also can be that you have maybe already an existing role concept so that you don't need to program that by yourself, but you just need to configure certain data access rules and things like that. Both of these things makes the pre-built components as well as the visual development makes it easier for people to start building software, as well as you don't need to start from field 1, so you really can also build software way faster. The other 3 things are a bit more difficult to show, actually, but the connectors are basically things that should integrate your application in an IT landscape, because you usually don't want to have only your application that does something, but it should also engage with other systems. And the connectors are basically an abstraction of exactly this communication. The ready-to-use environments and the integrated build pipeline are tightly coupled together and are basically just that the platform provides you a way of deploying your software without setting up something on your own, but the platform takes care of that as well. Usually, and especially if I talk to people in IT, then someone tells me, yeah, listen, that sounds great, but sounds very limited. So you do have some components ready, and as soon as you can't use this component anymore, then you're stuck and you invested a lot of money into an application and you can't do whatever you want. And the usual answer is a low-code platform aims to be as open as possible. And you have basically 3 different ways of extending the low-code platform. It's called low-code because you actually can execute code, both on the front-end side as well as on the logic layer, with, for example, Java, JavaScript, or whatever you prefer. And last but not least, you can also use the connectors to connect other systems. And this is what makes also a lot of sense. If you have some expert systems, maybe you want to use some AI, then obviously you don't want to integrate that in your low-code platform and build it in a visual way, but you're going to build a different system somewhere and just transport information to the expert system or get it from the expert system. Talking about the platforms, at Zühlke we use Mendix and Simplifier a lot. And we already built several different applications, mostly enterprise applications, so not what we are looking at the moment or in a minute. But we, for example, built an application for the health insurance Zühlke, where if you're an enterprise or a company and you want to have accident insurance, then you approach someone at Zühlke, and they used, and that's not a joke, they really used Excel sheets to calculate everything. So they had a huge Excel sheet with a lot of logic in it to calculate the premium. And as you can imagine, that's probably quite error-prone because somewhere in this Excel sheet is probably a mistake. And you can't have any version control on an Excel sheet. So if you just keep it on your desktop, and someone releases a new version of this premium calculator, maybe you just use the old because you don't know that there's a new one. And they also got then some troubles with the regulator because they said that's not compliant anymore. And they also used, for example, heavily email communication to get approvals, because if you exceed a certain limit of the premium, then you get approval. You need to get approval from your boss, for example, that you can do that. And yeah, it was an email communication, and maybe you just forgot to send the email and sent the email directly to the client, and then you already had an issue with compliance. So they decided to build a new software that takes care of the whole quotation process. And we pitched it, let's do this with low code, and it's actually very successful. Recently, someone applied for a position I have, and he told me he worked at Zühlke and heard about Zühlke because of this application and decided to apply. So I think we did quite a good job there. And the other two, you actually can scan the QR code and you come to the application. One is a tenant portal for the Alfred Müller real estate company in Zug. And you can just digitally interact with with your real estate company. So whatever you want to do, what you needed to take a phone maybe and call them is now digitally available. So if your wash machine breaks down, you can submit a ticket, or if you want to know your balance, you can go to the tenant portal and check it. And last but not least, the application on the bottom is the so-called MediQ application. And this is actually something that we're very proud of. This is a medical regulated software that actually checks for multi-medication. So if you need to take different drugs, you need to make sure that you don't have any substances that interact with each other and cause harm. And you can check in this application if you can give to a patient these different drugs, or if they will, in the worst case, kill him. So this is a bit about what low code is, and also what we at Zühlke do with low code. But I promise to somehow explain how you can quickly check your business idea. And instead of just talking, we maybe just start doing it. Sure.
So how much code did they require? Like, what do we mean by low code? I mean, was it literally no code, or did someone have to write a little bit of?
Yeah, that's a good point. It really depends. Most of these applications did have very few code, except the Zühlke case, because they also, we built the whole calculation of the premium in the low-code app. And there were two reasons why we used Java for that. First, it's not really fun to do complex calculations with a visual way of representation. It just takes longer instead of writing 1 + 1, for example. And on the other hand, it was also the idea of the client was if they decide to not longer use the low-code platform for their application, they want to keep their core business substance basically available. So the part of the premium calculation is what they are most proud of, or what is actually their core business. And they just wanted to be able to extract that and use it in a different application as a usual Java code. So there was a lot of Java code involved. But still, to build the whole process and the whole user interface and everything, this is all done by, in this case, Mendix. And that's also where you get a lot of speed out of it, because this is basically an in-house application that the employees use. And you just need to somehow have a nice flow. But obviously, you can reuse a lot of styling again and again. And that really helps to also build the application quicker.
Is it possible also to get the source code of the application if, for example, you want to do something more?
Yeah, that's obviously also something that the platform vendors realized, right? That you don't want to have this lock-in. Obviously, they want to keep that you use their platform as long as possible, but they all claim that you can export the code. However, if you ever used a software that built other software, usually this code isn't the code that is the most nicely formatted code and also the most reusable code. So you can somehow get the code, but probably you're not going to build a lot of functionality on top of it. So back to the actual promise. Let's say we have an idea. I came up with a little business idea. We want to do an application that you can share maybe devices or other things in the greater area of Zurich, because you don't want to buy everything, but you just want to maybe also be able to borrow it from someone else. We already had the idea. So now it's about having a first running application to maybe pitch it to someone with more investment capital, to some venture capital, or maybe also to get some feedback whether our business idea is going to work at all. For that, we thought about what we are going to need to do that, and said we want to be able to do two things. First, we want to be able to enter a new ad for a certain device or another thing that we want actually to put on the platform. And then obviously we also need to be able to see all the different ads that are on the platform available. That said, I already mentioned that we at Zühlke actually work a lot of time with Mendix or Simplifier, but we are going to use for this example a platform called Bubble. And we are going to use that because it's just a bit easier to understand how it works instead of the more complex ones like Mendix or Simplifier. And because we do now have internet, we actually can also try to do that. So we start here. It's Bubble.io. It's actually free. So if someone wants to try it, you can just register yourself. You obviously are not allowed to then do any productive use of the application, but to just try it out, you can just go to the website and register. It's basically a three-layer application. We have a user interface here on top, then a logic component, and a data store layer. What we are going to do is now we are going to build a user interface first, and also somewhere where we can put our data in, and then we are going to connect them via the logic layer. On the left-hand side here, we do have these so-called reusable components, and we can just drag and drop them in a very visual way to build something. So we just drop a text on top maybe, because we say, let's give this a nice title. We need to enter here some information. We call it share device. Probably not the best name for our company, but let's do that. Then we can apply some styling. We could actually style it quite nicely, but in terms of time, we limit ourselves a bit. What we now need are probably a couple of input fields that we can describe our device, and then a list where we can show all the devices registered on our web page. So first, we put an input field here. Obviously, we probably also need to have a text box here that describes what you should enter. So let's say we say the device name and a bit nicer maybe at least. And here we say here should go device name. And second, we maybe also are going to need an input field to contact the respective owner. We make this very simple. We just say this is the contact information, and you can decide on your own what you enter, whether you want to have email or maybe just a phone number. And what we now need is we need somewhere a button to submit our information. And you just drag and drop this as well and say, well, submit. And that's it. So we already have a form where we can enter some information. We obviously didn't style it very nicely, but at least we do have something working. What we will do next is we somehow need to persist our data. And for that, we go to the data layer and add just a new entity. Everyone who already worked with databases will immediately recognize that this is just actually an abstraction of a creation of a new table in the database. And we will call this advertisement, maybe. Create it. It will pre-populate some fields, as you can see. And we now need to have two more fields, the device name and also the contact information. There we go. So now we do have the fields where we can persist our information. And what we now need to do is we can actually check. We can just use the integrated build pipeline as well as the environment that the vendor provides. And we can see we deployed our application. The only issue is that we are going to face is if we enter here anything and submit, nothing happens. Obviously, because we didn't do any attach any logic yet. So what we are doing next is we go to our button, and what we want to do is if you click the button, it should trigger a workflow that stores this information. For that, Bubble uses really a very easy way of understanding it, because it says here, when button submit is clicked, then, and now we need to say what should happen. And we need to create a new thing, as they call it. That's the object that should be persisted in the database. And here we just need to map the individual fields. So the device name in the database should be the input device names value. And the other field, the contact information, should be the contact information's inputs value. And what we then also can do is we can say it should reset the relevant input fields so that they are emptied after you submit your information. By doing those two small steps, we actually should be able to now refresh our page, enter some information here. Let's say we want to have a toaster, and you can contact silvan.stich@zühlke.com to get the toaster. And if we now navigate to the data layer, we can also see what data is in there. We see that we do have one entry in the database, so we're fine. And now the last thing we need to do is we somehow need also to show that there are actual devices that you can borrow via the website. And for that, we can use something like a repeating group. That's an element that repeats depending on the input. And for example, you can just say the type of content that we want to display there is from the advertisement. And the data source is also very easy. It's like you say where the data should come from. So do a search for all advertisements. And now we could add some constraints if we want to. The only thing we're going to do is we say we want to sort it according to the created date. And now that's my famous, I love this part. You can say, yes, it should be descending. So let's do that. And then we need to display somehow also the actual values that are stored in the database. And for that, we need some dynamic values. So that's actually what we retrieved from the database. And we just need to say it should display the device name. And then last but not least, also the contact information. And as you can see, it already repeats itself in all the different cells. And when we did that, we should actually be done. And here is our toaster. And if we now say we also want maybe to have the laptop available, then you can call me and I will give you the laptop. And within now, I would say 10 minutes or so, we got a first running application. Obviously, you don't want to share this with your potential customers probably yet. You want to add some more logic, be it a registration process, or maybe also style it a bit more nicely. But at least with no code written at all, we managed to somehow build an application in a few minutes. And especially if someone approaches you now and says they have a great idea for an app, if you can build it, you can tell them there is another way they can build it on their own. And to also prove that we actually used real environments, oh, that was not what I wanted. You can just scan the QR code and we should actually be able to see our application. And I would say that's it. Perfect. In time for a Q&A.
So first of all, if you have any questions, just raise your hand and Silvan will try to answer.
Can you go one slide back?
One slide back. That's an easy one. Yes.
So would you say it's even fast, still faster if someone has a computer science experience, like has experience of how to build an app, and because you can already bootstrap a website by using a already template, either open source or some website?
Mm-hmm. Well, it certainly depends on the use case, right? Using Bubble to build a simple web application, you're probably still faster, but it's probably not the thing that I'm looking for with my team. But if you have more complex web applications, so like this quotation process, for example, you certainly get a lot of speed out of the low-code platform. The downside of it is obviously you also need to have a use case that fits this specific platform. So it's like before you start a project, you really need to think whether it makes sense to use the platform instead of doing it by hand. But given the different projects we did, we can really say you are faster as well. You're faster with the development, actually. What doesn't change are, like, for example, all the communication parts. So if you need to align with an enterprise architect on how you embed your software in the IT landscape of this enterprise where you work on, that doesn't change, right? This is communication between two people. So it's not like you can build your application within a couple of minutes in a complex enterprise environment, but building the actual software itself can be quite quicker.
How much time does it take to create, for example, the Zühlke application compared with the native code?
It's actually an answer that we never can fully answer because we never did it in custom code. So it's hard to say whether we had a speed increase of 20% or 50%. We really didn't know. I would say we invested a lot of time in understanding the customer's business and less time in coding the actual application. And that's something that you need to keep in mind, even if you use a low-code platform to build applications quicker. All the other things that are necessary in an IT project don't change. So understanding what the customer actually wants, also understanding how you get data from a different system, align with another project team that they need to provide an API to get this information, and all these things, they don't change, right? So you could maybe say we need less developers to build an application compared to a Java application, but the overall time maybe doesn't decrease that much, but it's less resources we need. But it really depends on the project. If the project is maybe something that is very simple, that doesn't have a lot of interfaces, and the customer has a clear idea what they want to do, then you can gain also a lot of speed. One of my colleagues, actually, we are currently pitching for a project in Austria, and she started a month ago, didn't work with Mendix before at all, and she was able to digitize this process that the customer wants to see or to build within 5 days or so. Obviously, it's not done yet. We want also to get some money out of it, but they really have a first working application that we can show during the pitch. So you can really say in the beginning you're way faster. Yes, please.
Normally, such projects, they start with a proof of concept and they are simple in the beginning, and then requirements grow. So you start with low code. How do you manage the point where you need to advise your client as well that he probably should move away from low code to custom software solution or something like that?
It's really depending on which platform you look, actually. So Mendix and as well as Simplifier or OutSystems, these are really platforms they claim that they can also be used to develop enterprise-ready software. And also in our project, they are actually running and are in a live phase. So we wouldn't advise the client to move away from these platforms anymore because they invested a lot of money building it. But if it comes to the point that someone says, hey, let's maybe integrate some AI-specific component where we calculate, for example, in the Zühlke case, can maybe judge the risk better by using an AI, then we would advise that they don't start using the low-code platform to build that, but they have a separate system that we just connect to. So that's actually how we would treat an increase of complexity, by saying that's not a fit for the local platform anymore. Just build a different system and we will connect to that.
And why is it called low-code? Because for me it looks like it's more high-level code. Really high level.
Yeah. Yeah, very good point. I'm actually not sure where this term comes from. I read about that Gartner 2014 used this term first, because you just need to, well, if you understand code as a textual representation of an application, then it's obviously less code or low code. But on the other hand, you're absolutely right. It's just a next evolutionary step on how code can look like. I fully agree.
Are there any more questions? Because otherwise, I would like to thank you in the name of our listeners and the organizing committee for your very nice talk.
Well, thank you.
And for all your work in preparation.
Perfect.
All right, so now is lunchtime, just outside.